All right, class. So let's start with the process of urine formation. And when we look into the process of urine formation, there are three steps. These are glomerular filtration, selective reabsorption, and tubular secretion. Now we will look at the nephron. We will see which part of the nephron is responsible for which of these things. So here we are looking into the nephron. And if you look at the red structure, we do see this is the afferent arteriole and this is the efferent arteriole. We know this. Now, I want you to notice one thing. Do you see how the afferent arteriole has a wider diameter as compared to the efferent arteriole? Wow, yeah. Now, since the afferent arteriole has a wider diameter, of course, a lot of blood can enter the glomerulus via the afferent arteriole. However, the efferent being smaller in diameter, not all the blood can leave, right? Therefore, think of it. A lot of blood comes into the glomerulus via the afferent arteriole, but not all the blood can escape via the efferent arteriole. This maintains a high blood pressure in the glomerulus. So due to that, in the glomerulus, there is always high blood pressure. And due to this high blood pressure, listen very, very carefully. It's not letting me change color. Okay, and due to this high blood pressure, please pay attention. We have water, H2O, salt, salt, then glucose, bicarbonate, vitamins, then there will be amino acids. It's hard to draw, it's so tiny. Amino acids. All these things are filtered out of the blood into the glomerular space. And this thing, which is a mixture of water, salt, glucose, bicarbonate, vitamins, amino acid, this thing is called filtrate. And obviously the process is called glomerular filtration. Now, I want you to notice one thing. We had blood coming into the glomerulus, right? However, if you look at the filtrate, does the filtrate contain any RBC? Did I mention that there is RBC into the filtrate? No. Is there any protein into the filtrate? No. Therefore, I want you to understand that if you're a normal, healthy individual, you should never have RBC or proteins in blood. You should always be negative. You should always be negative for RBC, negative for protein. Okay? All right. So now within the Bowman's capsule or within the capsular space, to be specific, you have the filtrate. What will the filtrate do? The filtrate will now start moving down the proximal convoluted tubule, and as the filtrate moves down the proximal convoluted tubule, a lot of things get reabsorbed back into the system. For example, water gets reabsorbed back, glucose gets reabsorbed back, a lot of salt gets reabsorbed back, some ions, little bit of vitamins get reabsorbed back, etc. Why do these things get reabsorbed back? The reason being, listen carefully. Do we really afford to lose all the water? No. Do we afford to get rid of the glucose? No, glucose gives us energy. We need salts, we need vitamins. So obviously these are important stuff that we cannot get rid of. Therefore, these things are reabsorbed back into the system, and this process is called selective reabsorption. One thing I forgot to mention, in the filtrate, you also have ammonia and nitrogenous wastes. I have no space here, but just know the filtrate also contains ammonia and nitrogenous wastes. Okay. So now the filtrate at the proximal convoluted tubule underwent some modification, right? As glucose and water and vitamins were reabsorbed back, that changed the composition of the filtrate, and therefore at this point we don't call it filtrate anymore. We call it tubular. Actually, I should not use blue. This is called tubular fluid. Okay. So now this tubular fluid moves down the descending limb of the loop of Henle. And I want you to know that the descending limb of loop of Henle is very, very permeable to water and water only. So at this point, water is reabsorbed back. Think of it. If you are taking out water from the tubular fluid, what is happening to the concentration of the fluid? You are sucking out water. Obviously, the tubular fluid gets very, very concentrated. So at this point, at the very bottom of the loop, the fluid gets super concentrated. Now, the fluid moves back up via the ascending limb, and the ascending limb is permeable to salt only salt. So at this point, salt is being reabsorbed back. So think of it. When you were losing water in the descending limb, obviously you are concentrating the fluid. Now once concentrated, you are taking the solutes back. So if you are taking out the solutes again, what are you doing? You are further diluting the fluid, right? And this process is also selective reabsorption. The fluid now reaches the distal convoluted tubule, and at the distal convoluted tubule, what happens? The process of tubular secretion takes place. So, do we have excess hydrogen ions and excess potassium ions in the body? Yes. Those things are dumped into the distal convoluted tubule. Excess hydrogen ions, excess potassium ions, all these things. Apart from that, all the drug metabolites, do we take antibiotics and other drugs? All the drug metabolites are dumped into the distal convoluted tubule. And then this fluid enters the collecting duct, and in the collecting duct there can be further reabsorption of water, and then ultimately you end up having urine. So this is urine. Okay. Now, Rupa, where does this urine go? So, okay, let's go back. Let's go back to this one. Okay, class. Actually, not this one. This one. Now, I want you to focus right here where you see the white tubular structure. Do you see that? Now, right here, this is the collecting duct. and here this is the nephron, right? So the nephron collecting duct. The nephron is filtering blood, and it has the PCT, the proximal convoluted tubule, loop of Henle, distal convoluted tubule, where the steps or the processes of urine formation are taking place. When the fluid comes into this collecting duct, there may or may not be water reabsorption, but then please listen to me. This collecting duct ultimately leads to the minor calyx. From the minor calyx, the urine will come to the major calyx. From the major calyx, the urine will come to the renal pelvis. From the renal pelvis, urine will go down the ureter, ultimately to the bladder. This is the bladder, and the urine will be stored in the urinary bladder. Then the urine will be stored in the bladder for some time before you can actually get rid of it via the urethra. So now hopefully you have an understanding of where in the kidney the blood gets filtered to form urine, and once the urine is formed, how the urine is transported via specific structure to the ureter, which actually carry urine out of the body. All right. Okay. Real quick, we will talk about some hormonal regulation. Obviously, you will learn these in depth when you move on to physiology, but I'll just, talk about two hormones here. Let's say you are very, very dehydrated. You are running from chemistry class to biology to math class. It's hard. You are very, very dehydrated. You haven't had enough water. When you tend to get dehydrated, what happens to the urine volume? You pee less, right? And what happens to the color of the urine? It's darker. Why is that? Because your body is trying to concentrate urine, and your body is holding on to the water because you need water in the body. You cannot afford to get rid of the water. And why do you need water primarily in the body? To maintain normal blood volume. You cannot let your blood get sticky. You have to maintain the normal volume in the cardiovascular system. That is why it's really important to retain most of the water as you are getting dehydrated. So when you are dehydrated, the hypothalamus can sense it. The hypothalamus then signals the posterior pituitary to release a hormone called ADH, or antidiuretic hormone. The ADH then comes and works on the collecting duct. It acts on the collecting duct and causes the collecting duct to be more permeable to water. So from the collecting duct, water is reabsorbed back into the system. What happens when water is reabsorbed back into the system? Obviously, you have more water, so that helps to increase blood volume, and that helps to increase blood pressure as well, right? So this is how ADH work. Again, it is way more complex than we are describing here. A lot to be learned in your physiology class. Okay, now there is another hormone. Now let's say do you remember there is a gland sitting on top of the kidneys called the adrenal gland? Okay. When this adrenal gland releases a hormone called aldosterone. This aldosterone hormone works on the distal convoluted tubule, and it causes the cells of the distal convoluted tubule to be very, very permeable to sodium. So sodium